Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star one on your phone to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Chad Ettinger. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our second Knowledge Works webinar about reinvesting child support incentive payments and using Section 1115 waivers to provide employment services for noncustodial parents. In the future, we'll be working to add links to these Knowledge Works recordings from all these webinars onto our Knowledge Works web pages, so watch for that in the coming months. I'd like to remind everyone that if you're on the OCSC website and you go to our Knowledge Works web pages, you can review the page containing funding guidance, and you'll see 3 one-pagers that present information for you about each of the 3 funding streams and present things that you should consider while you're exploring each of these funding options. I also want to take a minute to tell you about the next Knowledge Works webinar that we are planning for June, which will be about partnering with courts to enroll noncustodial parents into employment services programs. Registration information for that webinar will be added to the main Knowledge Works landing page in the coming weeks. Now, let me get back to our webinar about reinvesting in child support incentive payments and using Section 1115 waivers. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to frame our topic for you briefly. Did you know that 14.5 million children were served by the Child Support Enforcement Program in 2018? Once again, as we talked about last time, did you know there was $33 billion of current support payments due in 2018, and we failed to collect over $11 billion of that current support due to children in 2018? Our enforcement remedies don't work for about a third of our noncustodial parents. Did you know that we could have potentially failed to collect child support for as many as 4.8 million children in 2018? Imagine leveraging your existing funding streams to improve your ability to collect more support for more of those children. You don't have to imagine. You're about to hear from Wisconsin, Washington, and Texas about how they have done just that. Our speakers today are going to include Keisha Rodriguez from the Office of Child Support Enforcement, Division of Program Innovation. She'll provide you an overview of Section 1115 waivers. Then she will be followed by Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, Deb Barnes, the Bureau Director for Child Support, and Carrie Smith, who is a Policy and Program Analyst in Wisconsin. Wisconsin will be followed by LaShawn Scroggins, who will talk to you about reinvestment and give you an overview of reinvesting child support incentive payments and exemptions to do so. She will be followed by Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, Economic Services Administration, David Stillman, their Assistant Secretary, and Sharon Redmond, their 4D Director. And then Washington will be followed by Ruth Ann Thornton, Director of Child Support for the Office of the Attorney General of Texas. Without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Keisha Rodriguez. After her and Wisconsin present, we will pause for some questions, and then we'll pause again at the end for further questions. Keisha, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Good afternoon, everyone. The Division of Program Innovation's focus is on harnessing the innovation happening in the field of child support within different states, tribes, local programs, and then highlighting those nationwide. We're not the innovators here, the programs are, and our goal is to take their lead and support them in this important work. Section 1115 of the Social Security Act authorizes us to do this work with you, and the 2 primary ways we get it done is first, through the issuance of grants and waiver projects, and second, through the strategic partnerships and initiatives that are developed. Our goal is to build an evidence base for ideas, partnerships, and programs that will serve our families in this caseloads. We also provide oversight to the Federal Child Access and Visitation Grant Program. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. I'm not sure if the slides are moving, so I'm going to keep going. Things you should know about our waivers. If states opt to request a waiver, the cost-sharing percentage is 34%, as with normal child support program operations. The federal funding share is 66%, up to a maximum of $2 million for the duration of the project. Funding is typically for 2 to 5 years, depending on the cost. Incentive funding is not an allowable source of the state share. I see the slides are moving now. One more, please. TANF funding is not an allowable source of the state share, and state maintenance of effort funding is also not an allowable source of the state share. If there's a tribe participating and requesting a waiver, their cost-sharing percentage is either 10% or 20%. As with normal child support program operations, the federal funding share is either 80% or 90%, with up to a maximum of $2 million for the duration of the project. Public Law 93-638 funds can be used as tribal share. Tribal TANF funding is not an allowable source for the tribal share. Native Employment Works funding is also not an allowable source of the tribal share. Since wage for projects cannot disadvantage other children served by the child support agency, if a state or a tribe is considering requesting a waiver, they must be able to invest new funds to pay their state share of the cost of these activities. They cannot redirect funds that would otherwise have been spent on the child support program's operations. Waivers can be a public-private partnership if a foundation or other private funder contributes to the state's share. OCSC can only grant waivers to a state or a tribe, not to a county or other government agencies, although the services and activities may also just be piloted in one or a few areas. Public funds from other state or tribal agencies, so as they don't originally have a federal source, can be used as the agency share. Private funding of the state share Private funding of the state share requires a waiver from the requirement to fund the state share with public dollars. So if a state or a tribe plans to accept funding from a foundation or other private source as their agency share, that must be part of the waiver request. By requesting a waiver from the requirement to fund the agency with public dollars, the private investment becomes eligible for federal financial participation. Next slide, please. Some of the examples of technical assistance that we've provided and have developed can be found on our website. One of them is Information Memorandum 1904, which is talking to the availability of Section 1115 waivers on, to fund NTP work activities. And like Chad mentioned, the many tools that are found under the Knowledge Works link on our website, and that's under the Child Support Professionals tab. And one of the greatest resources for you is our regional office staff, who should be your first line of contact if you have any ideas floating around and are considering the option of a waiver. They, in turn, will make not only sure that you understand what the process is, but they will connect with our division when you're ready to submit a request so we can go over the elements of what an application would look like. I hope this is helpful to you. I thank you for your time. Our next speakers are from the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, and they're going to highlight their project and share how their experience with this process has been. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Deb Barnes, and I'm the Director for the State of Wisconsin Bureau of Child Support. I've been in this position since October of 2019. With me is Phyllis Fuller, and she is the Policy and Program Performance Section Chief for the Bureau of Child Support. Phyllis has been with the Wisconsin Child Support Program for almost 20 years. She has been serving as interim section chief since November of last year and has been promoted to the permanent section chief position starting today. Phyllis will be providing information on her participation in the CSPED grant and now the 5-county demonstration project. Carrie Smith came to BCS in the fall of 2017 to oversee the expansion of the demonstration project. Carrie had primary responsibility of planning and implementing the expanded demonstration project. Carrie was also responsible for initiating, planning, and overseeing the 1115 grant, 1115 grant. Carrie left the Bureau of Child Support in February to take a position with HUD. And now I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis Fuller to give you some background on the CSPED grant and her participation in the 5-county demonstration project.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. I've had the pleasure of being part of the planning team for the first and the subsequent child support demonstrations. Wisconsin received approval for the first demonstration in 2012, and we were one of 8 states approved. Wisconsin selected 2 counties with multiracial demographics for the first demonstration. The first county, Brown, which includes the city of Green Bay, and this county is located in the northeastern part of the state. It is considered an extra-large county with a 4D caseload of about 14,000. And Kenosha County, which has a caseload in excess of 11,600 cases, and it's located in the southeastern part of the state along Lake Michigan. While the original Wisconsin demonstration did not produce conclusive, positive results in any specific area, the child support agencies participating in the demonstration experienced some evidence that a move from a welfare cost recovery service model, which uses as a first approach punitive enforcement tools, to a customer-focused model might be a positive step to improving communications and relationships with our customers. Statewide child support agencies are now moving towards referrals for employability assessment and to the provision of work supports as the first step in the enforcement process for those who are under or unemployed. Because Wisconsin wanted to gather more information about this service delivery model, in the 2017-2020 Wisconsin state budget, legislation was introduced and passed to expand this service delivery model into 3 additional counties, with the 2 additional counties continuing in the expansion. The 3 counties that we added were Wood County. They have a 4D caseload of about 4,000. Marathon County, which has a caseload of about 6,000, and Racine County, which has a caseload of approximately 17,500. Now, as we move through this process of rolling out this service model, one thing that we've experienced is that Wisconsin is an excellent choice for these demonstrations because our mission and service model is to support individuals and families in their efforts to achieve economic security and to strengthen families by delivering services to the family in a holistic manner that acknowledges their individual and group needs. Because the Bureau of Child Support is in the Department of Children and Families, which also offers many other services to families, we find this to be an excellent opportunity to partner with other state, local, federal, and community partners to provide services and to provide services in a way that benefits the whole family.
Carrie?
Yeah, thank you. This is Carrie Smith. Can you advance the slides, I think 2 slides forward, please? As Deb mentioned, my name is Carrie Smith, and I'm no longer with the Bureau of Child Support, but I was heavily involved with the application for a request for a Section 1115 waiver for Wisconsin. So I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about that process. So as Phyllis mentioned, Wisconsin was one of 8 states that participated in the CSPED project, wherein we received a federal grant, then we're able to draw down federal funds from that grant. And there was not a need for a waiver at that time because an award of the grant allowed us to do this project in just 2 counties in the state. We weren't required to do it in the entire state, and we were able to provide services that otherwise would not be eligible for federal financial participation. So as that project was coming to an end, and it was very clear that the 2 counties that participated, Brown and Kenosha, wanted to continue. From their perspective, they had changed their way of doing business, and it was much more effective for them, and they wanted to be able to continue to do that. And there were other counties in the state that were interested in doing it as well as our gubernatorial administration at that time. So in order to continue the project after the CSPED period, we set about obtaining a Section 1115 waiver so that we could then draw down federal financial participation from the state funds that were put into the project and expand to additional counties, but still only do the demonstration in 5 out of the 70-plus counties in the state. So it's a little bit about the process for Wisconsin, and I'll just say there's a caveat. We had a few things that may have slowed down our process internally, so this may not be typical for every state, but this is how this proceeded for Wisconsin. From the time that the very first draft of our waiver request was written to the time that we received approval was a 16-month timeline. And that broke down to about 4 months of internal draft writing. So there was about a 4-month period when we were working on the draft before we sent it to OCSE. There was about 7 to 8 months of discourse back and forth with OCSE regarding making revisions and additions and adaptations of what our request was. And then another couple of months until we got that final approval. If you can go ahead and advance the slide, please. So the plan was that we would evolve the CSPED model based on what we had learned and experienced in the 2 counties that participated and expand it because while Brown and Kenosha County were very successful in what they did with CSPED, they are considered to be extra large counties in terms of caseload, which is not fully representative of the breadth of counties and caseloads across the state of Wisconsin. So we wanted to learn more about how we could eventually implement the project or the model in all counties in the state. So that required us to learn what, for example, providing employment services would look like in a smaller county that had more rural areas and maybe didn't have quite as many resources as a largely urban area might have. I mentioned the timeline took about 16 months, and a large part of that was that we had changes in leadership on several levels. One, our administrator for the division changed, so we lost a bit of institutional knowledge in what sort of the overall vision was. And at the same time, we had some folks from the secretaries involved in writing and disseminating our request to OCSE. So there was a bit of confusion, and part of our writing of the letter process actually was us working out what exactly we wanted this model to look like. So part of the model planning process was incorporated into our waiver request process. So that explains part of the extended period of time that it took for us to obtain the waiver. So one thing was that we had the communication was a little bit more broad and within the state because we were working with our secretary's office. And as Keisha mentioned in the beginning, she strongly recommended going through your regional office, and I would concur with that because we didn't follow that process. And so that may have also contributed to part of why the process took as long as it did. So for us, because of the way the communication was structured, a lot of the development of what exactly we were requesting happened through the writing and rewriting of a lot of those drafts of the waiver request letter. You can advance to the next slide, please. So structurally, what our initial draft to OCSE was in the form of a letter. We just included kind of the basics of the types of things that you would include in a grant letter or any sort of project request letter. We had an intro and background which talked about our experience with CSPED and wanting to transition into what we call the 5-county demonstration project. We included specifics about what we were requesting a waiver for. So we wanted a waiver so that we could draw down federal financial participation from otherwise non-allowable activities, so providing employment services to noncustodial parents. And we also wanted a waiver from the requirement that we do activities in all counties in the state so that we could continue just doing it as a demonstration and learn more before we proceeded with potentially statewide implementation. We included a project description, what the goals of the project were, our target population and estimated number of families served by the project, how long it would take, which we applied for a waiver for 5 years, what our work plan and schedule was, our evaluation plan, and what the budget was. As I mentioned, we went through several revisions, both internally, but the most significant revisions happened in that dialogue with OCSE. So they actually gave us an outline, which we had not been working off before, so we changed the structure to meet the requested outline. We included things like the geographic location, what our communication plan was, any cross-program coordination that we would have within our department, the project management and staffing plan, which would included a list of our work group members, and then what OCSE's role would be in terms of oversight and involvement. If you can advance to the next slide, please. One of the biggest developments that we made in our revisions, particularly in talking with OCSE, was a more articulation of the budget. We had a fairly basic budget that illustrated what the state was putting in, which was a combination of GPR and PR, and what we were wanting to draw down for FFP. And we had that broken down by categories, which was automation, training, evaluation, and grants to the counties. We then adjusted that to stay within the $2 million cap that Keisha also mentioned earlier. And we also limited our FFP drawdowns to the money that we were giving to the county. So all $2 million that we're drawing down is a match to state money that's being put into grants directly to the county. So Wisconsin is a state-administered, county-operated system with child support. So all of the funds for the evaluation, training, and automation are coming from state dollars. And then we're drawing down that $2 million on state funds that are being put in grants directly to the 5 counties that are implementing the project. We also, as we worked with OCSE, we developed more of staffing and oversight content, which I mentioned included the composition of the 5-county demonstration project work group, which had convened and was working on developing the project throughout the entire time that we were developing the request, the waiver request. And we also were able to, based on the work that the work group was doing during that time, we were able to add some more substance to our waiver request in terms of what the selection criteria would be for the counties, how we would select the 3 additional counties, and some more details on what the project goals would be. So you can advance to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, during this 16-month period, we convened a work group, and in the meantime, while we were waiting for the waiver, we began moving forward on developing some components of the project. So as I mentioned, we created an application and selection process for choosing the 3 additional counties. We started to articulate what the eligibility criteria would be for the noncustodial parents that would participate. We made proposals regarding how automation would work, how we would track the information about our noncustodial parents and the information we were obtaining from them regarding their circumstances and what their barriers to employment were, and our evaluation plan as well. And during this time as well, the project continued in the 2 initial counties. So from when we started drafting the waiver letter up until the end of September 2018, Brown County and Kenosha County were still in a 1-year extension from CSPED. And then we continued to fund them at a very minimal level just to keep things operating for them in that interim period between October 1, 2018 and April 1, 2019, which is when the new waiver was finally granted and put into effect. If you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So advice and lessons learned that I would share from Wisconsin was really to consider the full duration of the project. So for us, we were applying for a 5-year waiver, and also developing the project took a substantial amount of time. But ensuring to try the best you can to have a plan for staff turnover and institutional memory. As I mentioned, we had some significant leadership leave the state while we were in the midst of obtaining the waiver. So our secretary's office changed over because we had a gubernatorial change. Our governor was, we had a new governor come in. So all the appointed officials in the secretary's office that were involved left, and we had new people come in. And we also had a change in our administrator due to retirement at the Division of Family and Economic Security. So that, because they were such a critical part of the communication process with OCSE, that really kind of slowed things down a bit for us, and we lost some institutional memory because of that. And I would also suggest establishing any kind of work groups with the involvement of everyone involved in obtaining the waiver and then developing the project, again, to ensure some continuity if you're able to. And I would also, from my own perspective, establish clear internal communication protocols, not just up the chain, but also coming back down. So there was often a lot of delays in communication that, again, contributed to the length of our waiver process. So that's kind of a general overview of our process. We did end up getting the waiver, and it was made effective April 1st. Because of the work that the work group did, we were pretty much ready to go with our application process and the selection of the 3 new counties immediately upon receiving the waiver. So we were really benefited from being able to do a lot of that project development work in the meantime while we were waiting for that waiver to come through. So that's a general overview of the process as it worked for Wisconsin.
Thank you, Wisconsin. And Keisha, operator, if we could see if we have any initial questions, we'd like to take a few minutes to handle any initial questions. Since the operator is not opening the line, if we can go ahead and move on in the presentation to LaShawn Scroggins.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is LaShawn Scroggins from OCSE's Division of Policy and Training, and I just wanted to share some information about the process for reinvesting child support incentive payments that improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the child support program. Next slide. Each state earns child support incentive payments, and those payments are to be reinvested into the child support program. These funds, however, can also be used for non-4D activities if the state gets approval from OCSE. If you want to use the funds in non-4D activities, the activities have to result in improving the effectiveness and the efficiency of the child support program. And it's Section 458F of the Social Security Act that gives the authorization for the Secretary of HHS and OCSE to grant that exemption. So I wanted to move to the next slide and share a little bit of information about requesting a 458F exemption. On January 31st, OCSE issued AT 20-01. This AT actually supersedes the former AT 0104, and it reflects new protocols that OCSE initiated to ensure the efficiency of the request. It provides the review information and approval process. Some of the major revisions in the new AT include an extension of the time period for an exemption. Previously, states could ask for an exemption 1 year at a time. This new AT extends that period to up to 5 years. So instead of a state being able to do a project for 1 year, then coming back in the next year saying we want to do it again this year, if you know that you want to do it for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, you can submit that one initial request for up to 5 years, telling us what that activity is that you want to do and how long you want to do it. These requests get mailed to the Division of Policy and Training, emailed to the Division of Policy and Training. That's new in the process. Previously, many states mailed it in, or they may have even emailed it to the regional specialist. Once the request is emailed to the Division of Policy and Training, we will make sure that the regional program specialist is aware of it, because they also have a role in the process of reviewing the request and making a recommendation for approval or disapproval. Another new piece is that when a request is made for more than a 1 year time period, we do require that an annual update be provided, and I'll share additional information about that as we move along. Two additional things I wanted to say about these requests is that a state should get approval for the activity before you actually use the funds. So if you know you have a particular start date in mind, you want to make sure that you give yourself some leeway. I would say maybe 2 to 3 months before you want to start the process, so that so that OCSE has time to review your request, to communicate with you if there's additional information that we need. So it's definitely important to make sure that you get the request in before you're ready to do the activity. And these requests can be made at any time. So there's no particular time of the year. If you decide in August, that you want to submit a request to start a project in December, that's absolutely fine. There's no criteria around that. And then another thing is that these expenditures are not eligible for FSP. So the amount of money that you reinvest in a non-4D activity, you will not get FSP for. Next slide. So this slide shows the actual information that is required when you submit the request. Again, the request is submitted to the Division of Policy and Training. Our email address is listed in the AT, but it is ocse.dpt@acf.hhs.gov. But your request must contain specific detailed information on the activity that you want to reinvest your incentive payments in. So if it's an employment program, we need to know that that's exactly what it is, who you're partnering with, how referrals are going to be received, how many people do you anticipate serving every year, what are the goals or outcomes that you're looking to achieve that's going to make the program more efficient or effective. We're going to want to know how much money you want to reinvest in the activity. We want to know how the activity is going to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the program. You have to make sure that there's a clear connection to and collaboration with the Child Support Enforcement Program. There have been times that we've seen requests that really didn't include the Child Support Program at all. So you definitely have to make sure that there is a connection to the Child Support Program, that the Child Support Program has some role in the referral process, the planning, and that the outcomes are going to benefit the Child Support Program. We also need to know the time period for the activity. It's important for us to know when you want your start date to be, when you want your end date to be, if it's a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or 4 or 5 year approval that you're requesting, we need to know that. And then finally, we also need the name and phone number and email address of the person we should contact should we have additional questions, or if we need information, we need to know who you want us to reach out to get that information. So once we receive the request, as I mentioned, is shared with the division, the regional program specialist for the state, so that they're able to review it and weigh in and make a recommendation. Sometimes they may have questions themselves and get back to you about that. We also share the request with our Office of Grants Management so that they can verify that the state does have that amount of money and incentive funds available. And they also let us know if they have any concerns about the activity that's being funded. After we go through our whole approval process, we'll send a letter back to the state indicating whether the request has been approved or not. Next slide. So once your activity has been approved, there are some responsibilities that come with that. If you're a state with a multi-year approval, we do require you to submit an annual report to DPT with the following information, and it's called an annual report, but really it's probably could be done in one page. But basically, we want to know, if you're doing this another year, how much did you spend last year? Because maybe we approved you for $200,000, but you only spent $20,000 last year. We want to know how much of that original amount that you were approved for did you spend in the previous year. We want to know if you intend to continue with the activity as you planned initially, because maybe you came up with an idea, started the activity for a year, and then you realize, oh, my goodness, this really isn't working the way we thought it would. We're not going to do this again. Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and revamp. Or it could feel, this is wonderful. We definitely want to continue, so we need to know what your plan is. We also want to know if there are any changes or updates to the activity that you initially requested. So if you started out with one type of program, but you decided that you want to revamp it and add some additional component to it that wasn't approved in the initial request, then we want to have an opportunity to be able to review that and know what it is that you're changing. Or maybe there's something that you thought you were going to do that you haven't implemented and things are going well without you even adding that piece. So any changes from the initial request we would want to know. And then for any request, whether it's a one-year request or a multi-year request, when you're at the point where the activity has been completed or you decide that you're going to discontinue the activity altogether, we would want a closeout report that includes a summary of the activity that you completed, the total amount of incentive funds that you spent, the total impact on collections. So based on the incentive payments that you reinvested in this activity, we were able to see that 80% of the people who participated made regular child support payments, or, we received X amount of child support payments from participants in the program. We want to know what the impact is. And also we would want to know the total number of customers that you were able to serve during your program. Next slide. So here's some additional information. The approval to use incentive funds for non-4D activities is subject to review at any time. If any of the circumstances change or the activity that was funded under the exemption proves to be less effective or efficient than claimed, the approval can be revoked by the Commissioner of OCSE. If the approval is revoked, then the state has to begin using the incentive funds in support of 4D activities. Also, federal auditors and central and regional office staff will have a role in monitoring state compliance with the reinvestment requirements, and also noncompliance will result in disallowances of incentive amounts equal to the amount of funds supplanted. So next we're going to hear from Washington State, followed by Texas. They're going to share information about how they've reinvested incentive payments, and Washington State has actually done the incentive payments reinvestment as well as 1115. So we'll hear from them next. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Sharon Redmond from the Division of Child Support, and I guess good afternoon to many of you as well. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. As LaShawn indicated, we are planning to talk about return on investment in regards to incentive funds. We also plan to talk a little bit about creating a contractual or interlocal agreement to use some blended funding streams. And then David Stillman will talk to you a little bit about the waivers Washington is using and has a vision of using, I guess, coming down the pike. So next slide, please. So in regards to investment of incentive funds, Washington has been historically operating under Action Transmittal 0104 because we have not made a request for use of investment of incentive funds since issuance of the new transmittal action, transmittal 20-01. But LaShawn gave you a very good overview in regards to all the components that need to be included in the request. And we can tell you from experience it's very important to put all those components into your request. One thing Washington has found is that it's very helpful to have the champion of the idea play a really large role in the request process. They are definitely the person that has the investment and the thought process behind the request, and you really do need a detailed accounting of how you're going to use the dollars and how they will be used on an annual basis. I would remind you something in consideration that we look at as well is that it's not eligible for FFP funds, but we still find this a very, very useful tool for helping our non-custodial parents find employment. Next slide, please. Washington has utilized this process for two different types. One has been, for example, one was a one-time request in which we had an employment service utilize boot camp classes. And as we all know, that the opportunity to develop the skills is certainly a critical component in employment services opportunities, but sometimes it's just the basic element of getting equipment. So we sought a waiver or an exemption to utilize our incentive funds for the purposes of getting some of the equipment for those people when they actually started the job, for things such as boots, maybe vests in the construction industry. But we've also, and that was one effort that we were approved to and utilized. Another way we've gone with employment exemption is a more recent request we made that we're very, very excited about that has to do with transportation expenses. We have an internal program called Alternative Solutions, and I'm certain many of you in the audience have similar programs where we have a certain set of members in our staff who work with the more intensive cases of barrier removal and referral processing for individuals who seem to have a number of barriers to employment. As they are reviewing the cases coming into them, they have noticed that about 1/3 of the cases have a need for the individuals to get public transportation. And as a result of that, we made a request to utilize incentive funds to be able to subsidize a 3-month bus pass for people in that circumstance. Now, in order to qualify, they must have an open child support case with us, and we would want them to have been referred to our internal unit, Alternative Solutions. They must have income of less than 200% of the federal poverty limit. They must reside in one of the counties where the bus service will work for them, which is quite logical. And then they must be able to obtain transportation, unable to obtain transportation assistance through other sources. If that in fact is true and our Alternative Solutions wants to provide that 3-month subsidy, we expect them to deliver that kind of a benefit to them. So actually these kind of endeavors can, because it's a pilot, we are only expecting to service about 100 people in the first year, and it's costing us about $16,000. So it's not a substantial fund in request to using money, but we're pretty confident that we are going to see some really good results from this. Next slide, please. As I indicated at the beginning of the presentation, obviously as a program, you're making considerations about would you want to reinvest incentive money, admittedly without the FFP, would you want to consider a waiver? But as a state, we've also determined that there are other ways to go about utilizing funding, and this has to do with PIQ 12-02. And this is where there's been some guidance that's indicated that as long as expenses are incidental and related to the establishment of fraternity or establishing, and I meant in that third bullet to continue on, which I do, about modifying, enforcing, and obtaining support. So really what the crux of this is that you need to be partnering with other programs, which would include outreach, referral, case management. But often it's a challenge to figure out when can you use 4D funds for this and when should you not. And so for Washington, what we have been utilizing is an interlocal or contractual agreement in which we believe that you can we are authorized to use 4D funds, but we can't necessarily provide the level of service product for the individual that we would want to see going at it alone. So the PIQ indicates that you can use this for navigator strategies, providing referrals to other social service agencies. And by this, I mean you can use 4D funds with the federal match. And so as a result, what we have done is, next slide, captured the various funding streams and gotten into agreements with some of our other service providers in regards to providing adequate services for our non-custodial parents in regards to employment. So one way we went about it was utilizing our Employment Security Department, which is our overarching employment service for the citizenry of our state. But what we did contractually is sought to deliver a higher level of service because we would be referring people with barriers to employment that need more intensified services. We also partnered with our South Seattle Community College with working with formerly incarcerated individuals who also have many barriers to finding employment. Next slide, please. And so what we felt was critical in this partnership, well, first of all, it's critical getting your partners together in the room and finding out who will deliver what service and how you can do that in a sensible way. But it's also critical in our minds to put forth in the contract the proper elements demonstrating that the services and the money we are providing is an appropriate 4D funding, whereas the remainder of the services are funded by other funding streams. So within the contract, we certainly put the purpose, why we're developing this partnership. And then next slide, please. But then we always put forth the authority, and the authority will include the CFR and the PIQ. But then also we put within the contract the funding streams, because we feel it's really important to identify to both our partners and within the contract that we have conditions around our funding. We can only fund navigational services. As a result, we're going to need some other funding sources to bring this alive. And so as a result, they are putting in some money. Other partners, maybe not even within the contractual arrangement, are putting in some money. We identify that as well as the service delivery they're providing to create the comprehensive package of service delivery that we are really seeking and our customers and non-custodial parents are needing. Next slide. And so what I want to share with you, and then we'll move to David's presentation around 1115 waivers, is just one of our success stories that we're really proud that this type of blended contract funding has provided for us, that we're pretty confident we would not have seen this result without it. And so let me tell you real quickly about Sarah, who had her first child prior to the age of 18, and the father of her child was a drug user. Sarah began experimenting a little bit with drugs and got sick from it, went to the hospital, and her children were removed from her home. And then she slid downhill from there. She tried treatment but kept going back to drugs. The children's father went to prison for drug distribution. Sarah had no money, so began distributing drugs as well, and became arrested in 2015 and was convicted. She stayed in prison for almost 5 years, but she went into work release and then joined our PREP program, which was our employment services program, and started working with the Division of Child Support around the debt that had accumulated. She found a job working in a hotel kitchen, and then she began making payments on the debt. Then we had a conversation with her about debt compromise because some of it was state debt, and we reduced the debt to a more manageable level. She's been making payments on this case since July 2019, and she recently contacted our division and asked if she could increase her payments because she wanted to get the debt paid off. From our perspective, this is exactly what this program is about. It's obviously not every case creates incredible results, but on a lot of our cases, we're seeing some very impressive results. So I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about the 1115 parts of our program.
Great. Thanks for the warm handoff, Sharon, and good afternoon, almost good afternoon, I think, to everyone. I do appreciate the chance to talk about what I would call how to develop a vision for a waiver. And I'm sure it's no surprise to the folks that are on this call today that and webinar today that the child support program, the 4D program, has had a long history of successful innovation in the design and delivery of child support services. And as I look back over the last 30 years, child support programs across the country led the way in implementing business process reengineering long before that term was coined, as well as in standardizing and automating a wide variety of functions in support of establishing and enforcing support orders. Programs at the state, tribal, and local levels are continuing to innovate today and leveraging technology, looking to data analytics and other tools on the leading edge. A bit nostalgically, I guess, during my tenure as the 4D director in Washington, it became obvious in the data that we needed, and we still need, to identify and implement new strategies to empower parents with barriers to employment that were willing to support their children. That observation has, I guess I would say, I've doubled down on it. My more recent experience as the DSHS Assistant Secretary with responsibility for TANF, SNAP, refugee and immigrant assistance, disability determinations, and child support has only served to reinforce what we see in the data. And what we see is that the parents that we struggle to collect from have the same barriers that unemployed or underemployed TANF and SNAP clients experience. Without making a super long laundry list, physical and behavioral health barriers, a lack of workforce attachment, criminal justice involvement, substance use disorders, limited English proficiency, limited educational attainment, and more, often co-occurring. So with all that in mind, I wish I could say that TANF and SNAP, both here in Washington, as well as across the country, had it all figured out. But much like the 4D program nationally, what we've come to realize there is that we've only been partially successful, with most of our success found with clients that have the greatest resilience. That aside, there is good news, and I would say in Washington and a number of other states and jurisdictions, we know now that in order to reach the next level of performance, our efforts to innovate have to be founded on the experience and advice of the very families that we aim to serve. I've had the privilege of serving as the co-lead of Governor Inslee's Poverty Reduction Work Group and spent the last couple of years working hand in hand with a steering committee of individuals experiencing poverty. And more than simply listening, we've worked hard to build an approach that truly puts the steering committee in the driver's seat to identify both the problems and solutions necessary to reduce poverty in our state. Similarly, we are turning to the voice of lived experience to build a viable and influential interagency fatherhood council here in Washington. Next slide, please. So the data shows that dads continue to be the non-residential parent in the vast majority of cases. And we know from research that co-parenting matters. Children thrive when they're able to build and maintain positive and nurturing relationships with both of their parents. Next slide, please. What fathers tell us includes that there are few services truly available to them, and that they experience financial insecurity, they experience social stigma, that they continue to have a difficult time navigating the 4D system, let alone other systems, and that they're disadvantaged when it comes to issues of parenting time and custody. Next slide, please. So what might we do? Forbes magazine recently, well, not so recently, a couple of years ago to be clear, featured a brief video a few years back titled The Art of the Possible by Christopher Vollmer that focused on moving from re-engineering to reimagining. And I'm going to take the liberty of paraphrasing his insights and applying them to our work so that it might sound something like this. Too many government agencies continue to implement strategies that fail to respond to their customers' and clients' needs. They're trying to forge a new path with an old map, and that's a recipe for disaster. Instead of using old methods as a way to keep pace, government agencies need to take a leader mentality and imagine the art of the possible. We should ask ourselves, what can we do now that we couldn't do before, thanks to changes in technology and user feedback, and frankly, thanks to changes like an 1115 waiver opportunity? What would be different if we put the family in the center of how we design and deliver our work? That's how great organizations transform and deliver value in times of significant disruption. Although the OCSE-IM focuses on employment and economic mobility, it also opens a door to developing an approach that increases access to programs like SNAP, which not only addresses hunger insecurity, but can also connect participants to education and training resources, and perhaps by extension provides us with the opportunity to truly put the parent at the center of how we design more individualized, culturally relevant approaches that include warm handoffs to the services our families need. And finally, I want to add a special note of thanks to ACF and the Office of Program Research and Evaluation. If you're not aware, they recently extended a request for information in the Federal Register asking states and others to share our opinions about how to create a comprehensive multi-system approach that addresses the multiple barriers that non-resident parents face when trying to support their children. I will just make a note that comments are due this Friday, and clearly the time is now to reimagine what is possible. Next slide. I think this is my cue to turn it back over to our next presenter, which I think is Ruth Ann Thornton.
Thank you, David, and hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having us here today, and just want to offer my appreciation for the presenters who've spoken so far. You've done just an incredibly beautiful job of laying this out from various perspectives, and so what I have to offer, there will be some overlap and then some unique things, but I'll start, if we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. With just a brief introduction, again, my name is Ruth Ann Thornton. I'm the 4D director in the state of Texas. I've been with the child support program here for about 12 years, and actually came up at the beginning of my career with the OAG and child support in the business program area within our organization that helped launch the NCP Choices program. So its existence in child support in Texas actually predates my tenure in the child support program. So my heavy task today is going to be to endeavor to do justice to the folks who have come before me in this position and in many other roles to support this ongoing and really important work. So going back to 2005, and what you see in front of you is just a quick overview of the division of responsibilities between key program partners. But back in 2005, our division partnered with the Texas Workforce Commission and local 4D courts to launch the NCP Choices program for the same purposes as everyone else has mentioned, to address the problem of inconsistent, unreliable support, mostly by parents with unstable work histories. The Workforce Commission funded the early years of the program operation using a portion of its special projects funding within its TANF block grant funding. So that's kind of maybe the one twist I have to offer on what we've discussed so far today is in addition to incentive and 1115 waiver funding, we also use a portion through our relationship with the Workforce Commission of our funding comes from special projects as part of the TANF block grant received by the Workforce Commission. During those early years, our program services were focused specifically on parents associated with current and former TANF or Medicaid custodial parent households. And basically the model is simple, and there's a lot of words on the screen, and hopefully they're clear enough to read. I tried not to blow it up too much and make it blurry, but the model is simple. So our agency, our division identifies eligible parents, the court orders them into the program, and our workforce partners provide services designed to eliminate or reduce employment barriers. We do have some results from a third-party evaluation through the University of Texas at Austin that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later that showed improved employment and child support compliance outcomes for the parents that we served. We began as an agency and as a state reinvesting child support incentive funds in 2010. And at that point, program services were opened up to any parent with a child support obligation, not just those directly affiliated with a public assistance case, public assistance child support cases. One key factor, and I'll talk about some factors that I think have really led to the longevity and success of the program. One of those is that each agency does what it does best. So like we've heard other states talk about, individualized job services are provided by the local workforce centers, and enhanced child support compliance activities are administered by our agency. So that both helps us do what we do best and focus our resources in the appropriate area and keeps us on the straight and narrow from a funding perspective. The program has matured quite a lot over the past several years and now is serving, I think, 21 out of 28 workforce development boards across the state and covering about 80% of the state's population. So there are parts of the state where we haven't been able to fully implement, and that really gets to some of the challenges in our rural areas. I'm sure some of the others have faced those as well. OEG, our agency, and the Workforce Commission renegotiate our interagency agreement that keeps the program operating, and executive leadership at both agencies on an annual basis renew our funding commitment to the program. So again, what you see on the slide is our basic division of labor, and part of what works so well is that we're each doing what we do best. And for each agency, the program's integrated into standard operations, not a standalone or a special project. It's also adaptable to local needs. So at most of the courthouses where the program is available, it's about 37 counties, the court has secured and designated space in the courtroom, in the courthouse, where workforce representatives can immediately conduct initial intake with parents upon the court ordering the parent to participate, of course. And in a few areas, because of limited courthouse space or close proximity between the courthouse and workforce centers, workforce may be on call, and either scenario works pretty well. The contract that we have with the Workforce Commission is essentially a staffing contract. Funds are used to hire and retain workforce staff who are dedicated to the project, and sometimes in some areas there are workforce contracted staff who may be part-time on the project and split their time, and the program works really fine in either scenario and are cost allocated appropriately. One of the other features, I think, just kind of staying at a high level about the program that has made it successful or helped it be successful over time is that the fact that the program structure and the funding streams and our philosophy that within the state of Texas are well aligned, both from the mission of our agency and the child support program and the mission of the Workforce Commission and the mission of the courts. We're both doing not only what we're best at doing, but we're doing what we're mandated to do and what we're passionate about doing. From a workforce perspective, Texas is a work-first state, so parents build employment skills, identify career pathways, but job seekers are intended to take or required to take from workforce's perspective the first reasonable job available, build experience and work habits, and then also get support and work on career planning. For many of our parents, as I think has been identified in other areas, building those work habits that many of us may take for granted, waking up on time, navigating traffic, if you have transportation issues to work through, all of that is a really critical piece to their long-term employment success. And the perspective of the program has been to get them building those habits and working through those issues while also building their own internal capacity and supporting their children at the same time. So when appropriate, on-the-job training, paid training, subsidized employment, and short-term training are options, but program participants are asked to find a first job and then take the first reasonable offer. Programs like NTP Choices are especially, I think, important, like others have said, in the context of the direction and mission of the child support program as a whole, and particularly in the context of the discussion around ability to pay prompted by the final rule several years ago. In Texas, we aim for a holistic approach. We both want to look at an obligor's present ability to pay and right-size that order, but we also want to look at helping them achieve their earning potential. And in the case of or underemployed parents, we see NCP Choices as a bridge between those two things, their present ability to pay and helping them achieve that earning potential, both for themselves and for their families. Next slide, please. So since this webinar is about funding, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'd alluded to the fact that TWC, or Texas Workforce Commission, uses special project funds from their TANF block grant, and they have since program inception. So initially, the program was purely TANF block grant, but like I said, since 2010, we've been reinvesting incentives as well. The program itself, especially with its inception being founded in those TANF funds through Workforce, it's modeled on both previous noncustodial parent employment programs and Texas's TANF employment and training program, which is called Choices. So we began, like I said, in 2010, requesting for a permission to reinvest. And I'll take a quick moment of an aside here that Chad very politely and kindly re-educated me to stop using the word waiver when it comes to talking about the reinvestment of incentive funds. I've been using them interchangeably for as long as I can remember, and he absolutely kindly pointed out that these are two separate things, and I was just going to confuse everybody if we didn't fix it in my PowerPoint. So much thanks to Chad for his ongoing support and education. But since 2010, we've been reinvesting federal incentive funding. And another big shout out of thanks for the extension and the ability to do that every 5 years for up to 5 years worth of approval now. We have been doing it annually, and it can be a pretty long process, like was mentioned earlier in regard to Section 1115. And I think like LaShawn mentioned, you want to give plenty of time for OCSE to do their thing. So it was feeling very much like an ongoing process from our perspective. So we're really excited about the possibility of doing that at a different pace. So it was previously required yearly, or at least done yearly, and in that process, LaShawn did a perfect job of kind of ticking all the boxes. We provide data on the services that we offered over the funding period, what we plan to, what we did last funding period, what we wanted to do prospectively, things like length of continuing employment, collections, and other cumulative data. OCSE responded sometimes with questions, and we're at a point now where we've done enough of these that we've got a pretty good template down. If anyone would ever like to see what we submit, we're happy to share to the extent that it's helpful. Be more than happy to share that with you. As I said, the project, this has been going on for a long time, so I'm not sure that I can speak accurately to the timeline of that initial request, but it does take a lot of work to pull all of these data sources together, paint the picture, write the narrative. I love the advice given earlier about having somebody, the idea generator, the passionate person, the advocate for this project or this initiative, participate in the drafting and really championing this and shepherding it through the process, because it is quite a lot of work, and it takes a significant amount of time. Even with us having done these reinvestment requests over and over for many, many years now, it's still probably for us about a 6-month process just internally to gather everything, write the story that we need to tell, respond to any questions, and submit it in time for OCSE to have plenty of review. So my piece of advice on that would be to start early as much as possible, and to borrow from others who may have paved this way. We do also, so we currently have, I believe, the total program cost is around $6 million. We have approval to about a third of that is going to be reflected in our reinvestment of incentives request, and the remainder is in the TANF block grant funds. TWC allocates the total budget to each of the local workforce development boards across the state that are contracted to participate in the program, and we also have memoranda of understanding with those local boards. We, every year, go over target enrollments for each one of the 21 workforce boards and determine if the total amount budgeted needs to be adjusted, and if each local board will receive more or less funding than the previous fiscal year. Our IAC, our interagency agreement with them, also details each agency's role and responsibilities and the funding responsibilities toward the program. Both agencies then partner with the local boards, like I said, through MOUs. The program was intentionally designed to address previous program challenges by leveraging existing agency capacity and structure, not creating a standalone project, including measures to prevent parents from slipping or falling through the cracks of the referral process, in fully engaging the judiciary as a key partner. A couple of other notes on the permission to reinvest. The one thing I'd like to just offer, in addition to thanking Chad for clarifying my terminology for me, the process when I first engaged with OCSE on waivers and incentive requests it seemed really daunting, and I will just offer that our regional and central office partners have been amazing in helping guide us through this process. We've gotten a lot of supportive feedback from other states, and so if anyone is looking at all of this and feeling overwhelmed, please just know that whether it's your brother and sister agencies across the country or your regional and central office federal partners, they really have been incredible in helping us navigate this. Even for a program that's been ongoing for as long as we have, we still run into hiccups. We still have questions. We still use the wrong words to describe things, and they've just been really fantastic in helping us navigate all of that. So big thanks to them. Next slide, please. So one of the, as was mentioned earlier, some of what OCSE needs to see in those requests, whether it's an initial or a renewal request, is a lot of data. And truly what we spend a lot of time in crafting the reinvestment request letters is in compiling all of that and depicting it, like I said, telling the story. And so this chart is just one piece of that, but we use a lot of the real estate in our letter, in our communication with OCSE, like both telling the story of what we've done with the funding they've authorized so far and what we plan to do in the future. So just a couple of quick data points. As of February 2019, this chart I have the data, but I haven't updated the chart. As of February 2019, over $464 million in support has been collected from almost 40,000 parents cumulatively over the life of the project, or the program rather. Most of this is coming from wage garnishments, which is just really a resounding success story. On the child support effectiveness side of things, we've seen a 122% increase in collections on cases. 90% more child support payments are made by the actual program participants themselves. 23% increase in payment consistency by program participants. And even after participants exit the program and they're not receiving those enhanced services, we see positive impacts on child support payments. From the workforce side of things, and this is one thing to keep in mind, that at least the way that we've structured our program, we have things that we're accountable for and that really speak to the mission and the criticality of the child support program. The same is true for our workforce partners. And so understanding what helps them have conversations with their funders is an important part of this. From their side of things, 71% of program participants find employment, most of them within 8 weeks, and 77% of those retain employment for at least 6 months. So those are all metrics that we keep an eye on, they keep an eye on, that we talk about and try to calibrate moving forward to make sure that we're both serving our individual functions together. And again, keep in mind that these payments are from parents who were unemployed or underemployed and who on average hadn't paid a penny of child support in the 8 months preceding their court hearing. Next slide, please. I'll mention really briefly, we have a lot of internal capacity to monitor the program now. We didn't always have this level of capacity and expertise around it, and even when we do have internal capacity, it can be really valuable to have an outside perspective and someone asking questions that see around our own internal blinders. So we have had evaluations done on the program over the years, and they've been really critical in helping us build consensus and strengthen those partnerships. It's not just us saying that it works. Even though the data internally bears that out, it really does help, especially if you have legislative interest in the program or wanting to expand and partner with new courts, partner in new areas. It helps to be able to tell that story with a degree of authority that can only come from an external critical eye. We have taken all of our reports and tailored them to respective audiences. The beauty, from my point of view, the beauty of this program is that you can have really you can have a very different conversation about the program, its effectiveness, and its benefits depending on your audience, and be telling a completely true and compelling story. So whether you're talking to a legislator in a very, very conservative state who's concerned with accountability and cost recovery, or you're working with an advocacy group who cares deeply about helping parents with barriers to employment, there's something that we can pull from the data from every audience, and that's both from our internal expertise and our evaluation partners. And it's necessary. So OCSE, again, they're looking for some information on the impact to the effectiveness of child support enforcement. And so that can be a benefit of partnering with an evaluator as well. My only word of kind of food for thought would be whether in-house or having someone, whether it's in-house or an outside evaluator who can sift through the data and really pull out those nuggets of information for those diverse audiences. As for a decision maker, and I'm sure you all kind of maybe experience the same thing, if as a decision maker what you're receiving is a final report with an executive summary, it's not necessarily going to go on the shelf and really be used. So really making sure that you have someone tailoring that communication, and whether it's someone from the research community or on the program side, if we're going to spend the time and money to evaluate these programs, making sure that it's actually getting used, and having someone who can translate and speak that language is really, really helpful. The other thing I'd offer for consideration, I know I'm probably not doing anything but speaking to the choir here, is that a lot of successes are not quantifiable. And some are not. And when that's the case, so things like tests of statistical significance and whether or not an evaluation is kind of a true experimental design, it tends to matter less. And it doesn't not matter. It absolutely does. But I can tell you personally that where we've had some disconnect in the past is if we don't always define what success looks like, or if we define success too narrowly, that can show in the report that you receive from an evaluator or that you develop internally. So having a broad and holistic understanding of success, I think, can really set these types of things up for good conversation as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to go quickly on these last couple, just tips and lessons learned. Upfront investment and relationships are huge and critical, but they've got to be maintained. That's where we are right now, and I so feel the empathy for, I think it was Wisconsin talking about turnover and that continuity and supportability from a long-term perspective. Every state experiences that, every program experiences that, and from part of my perspective is that one of the silver lining values to these incentive reinvestment requests is that it helps memorialize our thought process. It helps us memorialize and create for posterity a narrative and a story around what we have done, why we've done it, and how well we did it, so that when you do have those opportunities for turnover or things change from a leadership perspective, you've got that document that helps be the through line for the program. So we're in that place right now where we're maintaining, finding that right balance between statewide coordination and local facilitation is important. For us, it's going to look different for every state and every program, which is kind of to my third point, that there's no off-the-shelf solution. We are more than happy to share anything that anybody would like to know, but it's always with the caveat that what's worked for us might not work. And from my experience, some of the value comes from the working out and working through those local details, whether it's from a funding perspective or programmatically with local consideration. So please borrow whatever you'd like. We're happy to have any conversation to support anyone looking to go down this road. But just know that our lessons learned are just our lessons learned, and hopefully they can be instructive, but they may or may not end up being solutions for others. Joint funding structure does support buy-in. For lack of a better term, we've got some skin in the game, and everybody's thinking about it from their own, as I said earlier, funding perspective, from their funders' perspective, and it helps support accountability across the board. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, it can be a long process, so start early and reuse what you can when you get into the renewal stage. Last slide, please. And then finally, I also would like to end with a little success story, just because I think it helps take things from the theoretical down to the concrete. And Dr. Schmer is a doctor of veterinary medicine. He, unfortunately, because of some life choices, his veterinarian license was suspended and he was no longer allowed to practice. He, overcome by all of that, he left the veterinarian field, and although he worked several other jobs, including retail and the oil industry, he became unemployed and eventually homeless. His child support payments became seriously in arrears, and he was ordered to appear in court. The judge ordered the doctor into the noncustodial parent choices program, and he was assigned a workforce case manager who approached him with the idea of working in the veterinary industry again. He was very on the fence about that and really doubted that he would have the opportunity for a second chance. And so he reluctantly attended an interview with a local veterinary clinic arranged by the case manager, and then interviewed and was hired by the clinic's owner as a veterinary tech working 40 hours a week. Recently, though, he was offered the position as the director of animal services, and he has been in contact with us to give credit to the NCP Choices program for leading him to success and reigniting his career and purpose in life. He truly enjoys his job and looks forward to going to work every day. So much like my colleagues in Wisconsin and Washington, those are the stories that help get us jumping out of bed every day and excited to come to work on projects just like this. So thank you so much for the support, OCSE.
Wow, thank you very much. Thanks to all of our presenters. A special thanks to Wisconsin, Washington, and Texas representatives for sharing their experiences. And if the operator would please open up the lines and see if we have any questions. We have a few remaining minutes.
As a quick reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please dial star, then 1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly when prompted. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please dial star, then 1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly when prompted. One moment while we wait on the first question. I'm showing no questions at this time.
Operator, I'd like to pose a question. Specifically, I think it was Carrie was speaking about this, but for any of the presenters from Wisconsin, they described the 5 counties and how expanding out their initial program operations to the additional counties really was beneficial in thinking about scaling it statewide. I wondered if there was any particular lessons learned that helped them consider how to scale that and build it out to the rest of their state.
This is Carrie. I can speak to a limited extent to that. As Deb mentioned, I'm no longer with the state, but we're working with Brown and Kenosha. They were both extra large counties in terms of caseload size, but definitely very different in many ways. For example, in terms of their relationship with their judiciary, the sort of the way that their judiciary approached court ordering non-custodial parents into alternative programs. Those are all variations that you see between counties, and adding 3 additional counties just adds that many more slight variations. And so what you really have to do at some point is start to really dig down into what are the core non-negotiable characteristics of your model that need to stay consistent across all counties, and where can there be room for the counties to adapt things to the conditions of their county circumstances, whether it's political or, what resources are available. And so we spent a lot of time in the work group having those conversations about what is the bare minimum that we know we can expect of every county, and the characteristics or features that we can expect from each county, and how do we articulate those things while allowing for them to not only adapt or adjust to certain constraints or resources they may have, but sometimes get really creative, because we didn't want to limit that creativity if they had a creative solution providing particular services that their NCPs needed. So that was my perspective on that, and I think that those variations are just going to grow the more different counties that you add, and because I think in any state you probably have that type of diversity from county to county.
Texas mentioned their experiences and spreading it to most of the counties, but some barriers with implementing in rural areas. So I didn't know if Ruth Ann or if anyone else wanted to add in about lessons learned for scaling these programs.
Sure, I'm happy to expand on that just a little bit. I think, in our state, we have 80% of the population concentrated in 5 or 6 cities, and one of the challenges has been really from a cost-effectiveness perspective, serving those rural counties where we have a very, very sparse population, and it doesn't necessarily cost that much less to do that. And so wanting to target the focus of the program as broadly as we can, while at the same time maintaining a solid return on investment for the effort. We've been looking at options for using technology to serve where we may not be able to have a physical presence, and so we're working on that. But certainly if other states would like to speak to that or have some solutions, I'm all ears, happy to learn.
Thank you for those additional comments, Ruth Ann. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this Knowledge Works webinar. Please watch for our next one that will be announced in the coming weeks around partnering with the courts to enroll noncustodial parents into these programs. Thank you. Have a great day.
Operator.
This concludes today's conference. All participants may